Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to continue our tech discussion on spark plugs and the proper way to gap spark plugs. We had a little bit of fun with the last video. It wasn't meant to necessarily be serious or actual tech, but we're going to spend some time today talking about the difference in plugs, how to gap, what gap to run, and why you might do things one way versus another. So directly in front of you, you're going to see this crusty looking BPR7, standard in Mitsubishi, standard in a lot of cars. Its analog is a BK for a Honda or 2J. The hex gets smaller, basically still the same plug. But you can see right here what we got is, get it to focus, we got a copper electrode. That doesn't really want to focus. So why would you run copper versus iridium? In our experience, we can run a copper plug on E85, let's say 3,000 to 4,000 miles on the street in normal driving. After that, they seem to start to have slight misfires. They start to go downhill. Iridium, easy 10,000 miles, as long as it's not getting fouled out. The main difference is durability. Copper is going to be a more durable plug. It's going to be a little bit more prone to misfires at high power, high back pressure, just because the copper is softer and less conductive. This one happens to be an example of what I consider to be a properly gapped plug. I gapped it to 20. We talked about this before, is that if you were to take and hold the feeler gauge right up to it, it doesn't go in. So we had some questions about that. Well, how do you know what it really is? I have a 19. This is a 20 thou. I have a 19 right here. 19 doesn't go in. I can force that in, I guess, if I wanted. So in this case, I purposely over gapped it. This is one tool you can use to move the gap back. It just locks in and around, and you pry it just a little bit. Now all of a sudden, that gap is huge again, and the 20 thou goes through real easy. Now with an iridium, you need a tool like this, or if you can't find something, gently use pliers, because if you were to stick the feeler gauge in here, you run the risk of bending or destroying the little iridium electrode in there, and once that thing's bent, it's no good. That's the main reason I use feeler gauges, and I don't bother to go all the way in. I just go up to it, is because I'm trying to be safe, not necessarily mess up a plug, so that we can make the plug change, make sure it's effective, go back to tuning, back to racing, whatever we're doing. So now let's switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about spark plug gap specifically. A lot of questions about why we choose to run 19 thou or 20 thou, where somebody will be like, oh, I got such and such an ignition and I can run 25, or I'm going to run 30. I'm going to get better mileage. I'm going to get more power because it's a wider gap. Well, I'm going to break that myth right now. We've tested this extensively. As far as mile per gallon, we ran out to 45 thousandths on an Evo 8 and drove from Vancouver, Washington to San Diego and back. Zero difference in mileage. Went down there one way on a tight gap plug, opened it up, drove back on the 45 thou. Couldn't go over 13 or 14 pounds because of the misfires. So ultimately, running that wide gap doesn't get you mileage. Now, OEs do it for whatever reason they do it for. That's great. I'm not going to debate that part. But in performance, it doesn't work. Now, being able to run good boost and a tighter gap, even as tight as, well, as loose, I guess I should say, 30 thousandths, zero difference in power. And that's using an M&W CDI. So we knew we had plenty of spark energy. Running a big gap doesn't make power. Pretty much the only thing I have to say about that. Now, some of the stuff that you can run into that's going to cause misfires, as long as your gap is good, this porcelain can be cracked. It accidentally gets dropped. I've seen hairline fractures cause the miss. This is out of an Evo 8. It seems it's pretty hard to do, but if the crush washer here is over tightened, it can create grounding issues. If it's loose, it can create issues. That's a big problem. A lot of people seem to tighten the spark plugs with their purse. And now I'm not going to tell you to torque it to spec, but if you know how to make a spark plug tight, make a spark plug tight. You don't got to go crazy, but you need to have it tightened down in order for it to be effective, both sealing and for the ignition side. Now, in contrast, we have some gnarly looking plugs. Here's a brand new iridium. You can kind of see the difference when you compare this. The porcelain is dark. This plug was probably running rich. Maybe it had boost leaks. I don't really remember exactly what was going on, but nice and clean porcelain, nothing on it, no aluminum, no peppering. Obviously it's brand new. So why do I use feeler gauges? Why do I tap things? Why do I use this device? Aaron, they make spark plug gapper tools. They're really handy. Well, the main reason I don't is I still like to read spark plugs. And a lot of those use a screw, and where you tighten it down, it will leave a line. Half of reading spark plugs is looking for lines on the plug. So if you knowingly put a scratch in there, how are you going to tell? It's just going to end up filling in and give you a false reading if you're choosing to also read plugs in addition to your sensors, because obviously you want to use your sensors. So what brands should you use? What material should you use? Obviously we've covered iridium, we've covered copper. Copper are inexpensive. They're great to replace if you're going to make a pass at the drag strip, throw them away, throw new ones in. Maybe you're on methanol and high boost. Iridium, a little more expensive, way more effective, definitely better on the street. Universally platinum plugs have never worked for us. The ones that have multiple straps, the dual one, the three-way one, and the four, all they do is they build up, it looks kind of like accreted corrosion in the inside. They start missing. They just don't seem to work in anything that I've ever seen. Maybe if you have a rotary or some motor that doesn't operate on normal physics, you're good. But for a piston engine, platinum and multiple straps doesn't work. Going to the brands, this is a Denso. Denso seems to work really well. We use lots of NGKs. You can see the NGK wall hanger behind here. I see a lot of cars come in with auto lights. That's a Ford plug. And I think what happens is it's not necessarily somebody went to the parts store and said, hey, I want to buy auto lights for my Mitsubishi, or I want to buy auto lights for my GTR. But when they talk to the salesperson hears Lancer. He doesn't hear Lancer Evolution. Unless he's an enthusiast, he's going to look up the wrong car, and this happens universally. Somebody goes and buys Autolite 3924s, which is a Heat Range 5 BKR spark plug. So it's meant for a naturally aspirated Honda, let's say. They throw it in their Mitsubishi. They come to me, hey, Aaron, you just tuned my car, and now I have misfires. Oh, okay. Well, let's look at the plugs. And I pull out the wrong plugs. Not that I'm picking on anybody, but save yourself a bunch of time. Make sure you know what you're buying. So BPR, which is a B projected Heat Range 7. ES in this case is copper. NGK, if it's going to be iridium, will usually be something like EIX. They do have AIX. They have a few variations, but the IX is going to be your iridium. Colder is better to a point. I've ran Heat Range 7 to 35 pounds of boost on E85. Past that, you need to start dropping down to an 8 to a 9. If you're going to run really high boost, a 10. But you better have a good ignition, and you need to replace them frequently because they like to foul out when they're cold. So that's one of the reasons that we swap plugs a lot at the track. So, in recap, making sure that you have the right tool for the job, whether you're using one of these older Craftsman spark plug tools, and this is also for points, not that most of you probably know what points are in a distributor, feeler gauges, tapping it on something, or using an actual spark plug gapper that isn't going to damage the strap, very important to making your performance car run correctly. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave some comments, hit the like button. I hope everybody's doing okay. Take care.